my name is Adam Krutinger, and I'm a puppeteer and puppet builder from Buffalo, New York. Now, I get a ton of emails from people asking me how I make my puppets, if I can send them a pattern, if I can give them a puppet. So I decided to make this video to teach you guys how to make a puppet from materials that you can find locally. Now, a lot of people think, if I only had the pattern, I could make that puppet. But learning how to make puppets is a process. You learn something new from every puppet you make. We're going to cover everything from pattern making all the way up until the finished puppet. Now, here are a couple of the tools and materials that you're going to need. A seam ripper, a hot glue gun, some spoons, these sheets of felt that you can get at a craft store. Now, a lot of people are afraid of making a pattern because they don't know how. Now, all you have to do is just look around you and you'll see patterns. For example, we're going to make our pattern today out of a hat. Now, to get the pattern from the hat, you're going to have to destroy the hat, so you don't want to use a new hat. This was a very cheap hat. I just got it at the Salvation Army for 99 cents. And we're going to cut it up, and I'm going to show you guys how to make a pattern from it for a puppet. You're going to use a seam ripper and take out the seams. This is an up-close look on how to use the seam ripper. What you do is you take the tip, the point of it, and you put it right in between where the two fabrics meet, where they're sewn together, and you carefully stick it right through, and if you push just a little bit, you'll hear a cutting of those threads. And once you get it started, it's a lot easier. You can see it starts to open up there, and then it makes it really easy to stick it in, and just make sure you're just cutting the thread. Try not to cut the fabric. It doesn't matter too much for this because we're just trying to get the pattern from it. But that's how you open up the seams. This is a super close-up view, and you can see the individual threads that I'm cutting. Just like that. Until you can take out one of those pieces, just like that. Now what you want to do is take this piece and put it on a piece of poster board. And what you're going to do is you're going to trace it all the way around, just like this. And then you're going to cut it out. So I just finished cutting out this piece that I traced from here. Now the hat has 6 pieces that go all the way around. So you're going to have to cut out this 6 times out of foam. And this is the foam we're going to be using. This is just a cheap foam from Joann's. It's very inexpensive, and you do not need a lot to make a puppet. You need very little. So what you're going to do now is trace this pattern 6 times. And to help save foam, you're going to want to oscillate it each time. Just like this. So there's one. Like that. So I just finished tracing out these 6 pieces. Now what you do is just cut them out. And try to make sure you cut them parallel, just like this, so that you don't have beveled edges. If you cut it sideways, you'll have beveled edges, which you do not want for this puppet. So cut out all these pieces. Just like this. So now that you've just cut out these 6 pieces, you want to start gluing them together to make the top of the head. So we'll take these 2 pieces here. We're going to use the hot glue gun for this. Normally I would use contact cement, but for the purpose of this video I just wanted to use something more common around the house. So you put the hot glue onto this side, just like that. Put those 2 sides together just like this. Hold it together, make sure it stays. Just like that. So there's one channel done. And we'll do another one here. Now I want to glue these sections together. And then the last section is going to go here. So I just finished gluing all these pieces together, so this is going to be the top of the head. Now the next step is to make the mouth plate pattern and the mouth plate. To make the pattern, what I'm going to do is take this paper, place the head right on top. Now you can see there's a center seam. What I'm going to do is start on one side of the seam, come all the way around, and stop at the other side of the seam. So that is half of the circumference of the circle. And then I'll take a ruler and I'm going to attach these lines together, just like that. So that's going to be my basic mouth plate pattern, but I still want to true that up, make sure that it's nice and even. So I'm going to cut it out. So there it is, I cut out that piece, and now I'm going to line it up on this flat edge here. I'm going to trace it, just like so, and then I'm going to flip it over and trace it again, lining up those two edges, just to make sure that everything is even. I'm also going to fold this in half to find the center of the mouth plate. I'm going to mark that. So there it is. It looks pretty even to me. So now I'm going to cut out this, and this is going to be my final mouth plate pattern. Now it's very important that you label all of your patterns so you don't get them confused. So I'm going to use this pattern for the upper and lower part of the mouth plate. Now some people use cardboard for their mouth plates. I really hate using cardboard because if you puppeteer a lot, your hand will get sweaty, and the cardboard will absorb that sweat and it'll just get mushy and nasty. So what I like to use is this. It's corrugated plastic. It's used for realtor signs, so you can find them around, and also hardware stores sell them as well for like a for sale sign for a house and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace this right on here. I want to make sure that I mark the center front. And then I'll cut this out. You want to cut out 2 of these. So now the next step is to attach the top of the head to the mouth plate. You're going to want to line up the center front line with the center marked part of the mouth plate. So here's what I'll do. I'll just apply the glue. It'll fit just right. So there it is. It's attached to the top half. Now another thing you're going to want for when you're puppeteering is, because there's all this empty space, you want a brace on top to keep your hand flush. To do that, I'll take a piece of foam and I'll take the mouth plate pattern, and just like this, I'll trace the mouth plate pattern. But you're going to want to come in a little bit, because if you notice, this is on top. So there's about a ½ inch of space being taken up. So you're just going to want to draw about a ½ inch around, just like that, and then cut out to the inside of that. So this piece is going to be glued right inside of there like that. That way your hand has a place to hold on to. So apply the glue. Slide in carefully. Just like that, push it down. Just like that. And then that's where your hand's going to go. And I'm just going to let this cool down for a minute. Now for the bottom jaw, you can use the same pattern piece, and watch carefully. So cut out 2 of these. And you're going to want to apply glue to this edge, what would have been the bottom edge. Go just like that. Then you're going to glue this long edge to the bottom jaw, just like that. So then here you have it, the top half and the bottom half of what will be your puppet. Just like that. Now we're going to get into the fabric pattern making for the head. Now we're going to use a little bit of duct tape. This is not a permanent part of the puppet, this is just for the pattern making to hold these 2 pieces together. I'm going to put it just like that inside of the jaw. This is the bottom jaw. This is the top head, top half of the head. I'm going to put it just like this, line it up perfectly, and then I'm going to tape it like that. So for right now it has that hinge, otherwise it would just be a separate piece. Now that's just for the pattern making part. So now what we have here is we have our basic puppet head, the foam with the mouth plate, and we have a pattern. So if we wanted to make this again exactly in the future. So for the fabric part of the pattern, here's what you do. You have your head just like this. Now what you need is some scrap fabric. This is just some scrap fleece that we're going to use. You could use this fleece also for your final puppet, but you're going to want to use separate extra fleece for the pattern. Now cut off a big hunk of fleece. It only needs to be big enough to cover up half of the head, because we're just going to copy it and cut out 2 halves once we have the pattern. So watch. So there's the front of the puppet. I want to just drape it right on top. Just like that. And then we're going to need some pins. I'm going to take the pin and pin it to right center front of the puppet. Just like that. So that is the very center front of the mouth plate. And now I'm going to do stretch it. Now when I say stretch, I don't mean actually physically stretching out the fabric. I'm just making sure that it's all flush against the side of the head. All the way around. Now this is the back of the head, and I want to make sure that I pin it directly at that back seam. Just like that. Now I'm going to pick up here, and I'll just watch. I'm going to slowly just start flattening out the fabric on top of the head. I'm going to put a couple pins right at the tip. There's a pin. And make sure I find the center seam up there. Just like that. Now this is fabric that we need to get rid of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin down the line, just like this. So now that is all pinned down flat. Now we'll start with the marker, start drawing those lines. So now this is the back of the head, and that pin is right at the back. So I'm going to draw a line there, symbolizing the back. And I'm going to follow that same line underneath on the foam. Trying to make sure it's nice and even, going all the way down, up until this top point. And now this flap here, I want to get rid of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw it down along these pins that I set there. Just like that. Same on this side. And then they all come down to that same point. And now the front seam. So again, I'm going to find that front seam right at this pin. I'm going to draw that seam. All the way up like that. Just going to even that out a bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw, I can feel the mouth plate underneath this for the top part of the mouth plate. And I'm just going to draw the line right on top of that mouth plate all the way back to this edge where I can feel where the mouth plate ends. Just going to draw a little line there. And now I can also feel the bottom jaw. So what I want to do is, this is the side of the head, is just take the fabric around like this. I can feel it resting on the jaw. So I want to pin that loose fabric to the jaw. I'll put the excess there inside of the mouth. Again, I want to find that center seam. I'll pin it right there. And I'll come up and I'll pin it right at the center seam towards the mouth plate. And I want to draw that same seam here. And then draw along the mouth plate. Just like that. Now we're going to come down a little further to where the neck would be. And I'm just going to draw, for now I'm just going to draw this line about like that, kind of like a rainbow shape from there to there, from the back of the head to under the chin. And now let's pull it off and see what we have. Taking out all the pins. And now what we have is our fabric pattern for the headpiece. So now I just cut out this fabric piece. So what I want to do is true it up again, because I can see this angle here, that's a little too sharp. That should probably be curved out a little bit more. And I just want to make sure that it's nice and even. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace this fabric pattern. And also I'll need to add some seam allowance once the pattern is made. So I'm just going to trace it just like so. So there we go. Now this, we can get rid of this piece. We don't need that anymore. So now we have our basic pattern, and what I want to do is just smooth it out, make sure, because remember this angle there was a little bit too hard. So what I want to do is just even it out, nice and even, like that. And this point here should be a right angle, always. This point here should be a right angle as well. I'm sorry, not always, at least for this round head pattern that we're making. Same with this point and this point. All those should be right angles. So make sure you get your ruler out, or any kind of straight edge, so you get that right angle there. But this should not be straight. This should be slightly curved. This is the chin. Sure, this is a nice even pattern. These points should also be right angles, so you're going to want to fix that up. Now for this mouth plate, generally this top part will be relatively straight. But as you can see, this bottom part does have that curve to it, so you're going to want to make sure you keep that curve. Another thing you're going to want to do is add just a little bit of seam allowance to the inside of the mouth. So probably about a half an inch is a good amount to add. So then I'll add a half inch of seam allowance. So now, cut out this piece. So I just finished cutting this out, and this is the fabric pattern cover for the head. Now, if you're making your first puppet, I would recommend you using a fur rather than a fleece, because a fur can help hide the seams if you're not a very good sewer. So I just got this cheap fur from Joann Fabrics. It was very cheap. I think it was like $5 a yard. So now I'm going to turn it over to the back to the netting side of the fabric. Now what you just do is trace the pattern onto the fabric. Now it's okay for me to use a Sharpie on this because this is a very dark fabric. But if I was doing a white or a very light blue or yellow, I wouldn't want to use the Sharpie. You can sometimes get away with using pencil, and there are fabric chalks and waxes that you can use, or even a lighter colored Sharpie, maybe even like a, oh, I don't know, like an orange Sharpie. So there you go. So there's one piece. Now I need to cut this out. Now traditionally, when you're cutting fur, you want to use a razor blade on the back netting of the fur, so that'll have the least amount of mess. This is an extremely short pile of fur, so I am just going to go ahead and use scissors on this. So these are the two sides to the fabric head covers. Now, before we go on with this, I want to talk about the fabric mouth plate. So I'll get that out. Now for that, I'm going to use one of these felt sheets that you can get really cheap. I think it was like 15 cents at a craft store. And for this, you're going to want to get out your mouth plate pattern again. So here's what you do. Trace this pattern, just like so. Mark the front. Go across like that. Now what I like to do is I like to add a little bit of space in between. You could just go like this and then trace that side, but I like to add just a tiny bit of space. And for this I'll do half of an inch of space. And now I'll trace the other half. And now let's cut around this. And there is your fabric mouth plate pattern. So now I'm going to be doing a demonstration on the sewing. Now a lot of people are afraid of sewing, but it's not that hard, and the more you do it, the better you'll get. At first it'll be rough, but you'll get it. So now for the purpose of the video, I'm going to use contrasting thread. I would want to use a black or a brown thread to blend in better with this fabric. But so that you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to use this white thread. So now when you're sewing, some people like to double up the thread like this and then tie a knot in the end. I don't. I like to use a single strand, okay? And I do not knot the end of it, because when you knot the end of it, a knot can pull through. So here's what I do. I'll take the thread, and I'm going to go into this. I'm going to do this seam first, so it's going to be put together like that. So what I do is I go in through that corner. I have a little bit of a tail. Let me zoom in. So I have that little bit of a tail still poking through. So what I'm going to do is go back through about the same hole. You don't have to be exact. About through the same hole. And then I'll pull it, not too tight, but just enough. You can still see that little tail. And I'm going to go about in the same spot again. And then pull. Go about in the same spot about 3 or 4 times. And then the last time, then pull it. And that will not slip through. And that is the best way to start sewing for something, if you're going to be doing hand sewing. So now what I'm going to do is sew this seam together. Now there's a lot of debate on what kind of stitch to do. People do a Henson stitch, but the best thing to do is a whip stitch. And here's what you do. So I'm going to go in behind on this other piece of fabric. I'll pull it tight, and then that piece will come. I'll fold it like this so that the outside fabric is pointing in. I'll pull that tight, and I'll go right next to here. Starting off is a little goofy because it's so loose, but once you get going, it evens out and it's a little better. There we go. So just like that. Keep sewing down. And now, even though I'm using a contrasting thread, you know, you're still not going to see it on the outside. But just to be safe, you want to use a dark thread if you're using a dark fabric. So there it is. That's called a whip stitch. And you can get another tutorial online. Just type in whip stitch and you'll have 100 things pop up on how to do it. But yeah, you just whip around all the way down. Now when you stitch, it's important that you don't pull too tight. Now if we're sewing lingo, you'll say, right now I'm doing what is called in sewing a tight stitch. Now tight means, in sewing terms, not that you're pulling tight. It means that the stitches are very close together. You never want to pull really tight when you're sewing, because that'll make it gather and bunch up, and it will not look good. Particularly when you're doing fleece, because that shows every wrinkle. But with the fur you can hide, you can cheat a little bit with that stuff. So I just finished sewing both parts on both sides there. So now what I want to do is sew these two edges together, just like this. Now this is a much longer seam than that, so for this you really want to pin it, so that way you don't accidentally lose. So that way you just make sure that it's all even. Line up the seams on the top of the head and at the back here, and same for the bottom jaw. Now when I sew, I want to sew this edge and this edge. I'm not going to sew this because that's the neck. That's where the hand's going to go in. And I don't want to sew this shut because then that's going to be where we're going to sew this piece in. So I just finished sewing up the head cover. So now what I want to do is sew the mouth plate fabric to the inside of this. Some people, what they do is they glue this to the mouth plate and then they glue this edge of the inside of the mouth to the mouth plate. I like to sew it. I think it looks a lot nicer. So I'll show you how to do that. So I'll turn this back inside out. Gotta get my pins. And here's what you want to do. You find that front seam, this front seam right here with the puppet head, the top half of the puppet head here, and you're going to want to sew that to this piece right here, up in that, where you have that notch. And I will put a pin right there to mark it. Now the same thing with this spot. That's going to be this part of you. That's going to be this part of your puppet, the front bottom jaw. And you want to line that up with the front bottom jaw of the fabric. And now these are where essentially the cheeks are going to be, and you just want to find that point right here and line that up. In between those two lines, we'll put a pin there. same on this side. And now I'm going to add more pins, just making sure it's all even around the inside of the mouth. Now what you want to do is use your thread and sew all the way around that mouth plate. So I just finished sewing all of this head together, including that fabric mouth plate. So now what I want to do is I use this. You can use hot glue if you want. It'll be a little bit trickier. But this is Super 77. It's a spray adhesive that's really good. And what I want to do is, for this case, spray all of that red area with the Super 77. Just like that. And then I want to do the same to the inside of the mouth plate on this. I still have the duct tape in there for now, just to hold it in place. And now I'll spray this. Just like that. I'll give it just a second to dry. Actually, while it's drying, I'll take the duct tape off, because we do not want that on anymore. So now what I want to do is stick this to the mouth plate. This is the top head of the foam, so I want to make sure I use the top half of the puppet. Line it up, line the notches up in the center, try to make sure it's all nice and even and nice and flat. See, my hand is inside of the head, and I can feel the felt there. I can feel that it's all nice and smooth. You definitely do not want wrinkles there. Okay, so there's that. And now I'll do the same with the bottom jaw. So there it is. It's all attached, just like that. Now what I need to do is flip it inside out. I just want to do this slowly. Even it out. Make sure the fleece is all, or the felt is all nice and flat on the inside. And I'm pulling it tight here to make sure it's all spread out nice and even. And that looks pretty darn good to me. And there you have your puppet head. The start of the puppet head. So this is our basic puppet head. And now it's time to add features to it. There's all kinds of different things you can use for features. Today we're going to use spoons. But you could use ping pong balls, Christmas ornaments. Some people use wooden balls. But for the spoons are nice because they're really easy to find and they're cheap. And here's how I do it. If you're going to use a spoon, you want to take the spoon and carefully cut off. You can just use scissors to do this, and cut off the handles of both of the spoons. So there's one. There's the other. Now to apply these eyes, you could just use hot glue. So now we have the eye whites attached. Now for pupils, there's a couple things you could do. If you don't have many resources, you could just use a Sharpie and draw it on. But I like to use something you can stick on to make sure that you get the eye focus correct and you can move it around. A nice easy thing to use are Velcro dots. And I put them on just like this. You can just take them off and stick it on just like that. And there you have a nice little puppet. And then another thing which adds a lot of dimension to the puppets is adding details inside of the mouth. For example, adding a uvula. I just cut this out of felt. I just use spray adhesive. So there's a uvula that adds a lot of dimension to it. And also a tongue. Put it on right there. And once you have a tongue in there, you can also add more details to it using a Sharpie. You can use a red Sharpie too, if that might have a nice little look to it. That's what I typically do. And there you have a nice puppet head. In the next video, I'm going to show you a few different types of bodies that we can make for a puppet.